author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. If it seems like the First Amendment is hanging in the balance, this week's stories show that that battle is still raging. We have a packed show for you this week, and remember, Liberty Nation Radio is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange set to be freed. That's good news for Julian Assange, but what does it mean for the First Amendment in the United States? That's the big question to deal with. And to help us deal with that question, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott Cosenza, Esquire. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.
Now, Scott, I guess the important thing is figuring out what process by which Mr. Assange is about to be freed. At time of recording, he still hasn't been for the actual hearing, but we presume that it's been approved by the U.S. Department of Justice and is going ahead. So what process took place here to end his 5 years of imprisonment in the United Kingdom?
Julian Assange wouldn't have been able to walk down the hall of Belmarsh Prison to the rec room without the approval of Joe Biden and the power establishment in the United States, who are the ones who have kept him in prison in the UK. It's kind of wacky to think about that it's not necessarily the UK authorities that have a horse in this race, but it's the US authorities that have compelled them to imprison this person. And that's what's going on. The process is just their way of, I think, maintaining the cover that they weren't attacking this man for journalism, but instead for some crime that is, relatable to the American people. And I don't think that's true. I think he was prosecuted and persecuted for acts of journalism. But in any case, he's set to be freed. And as you said, not at this very moment yet, but fingers crossed. I'm one of the ones who calls him a First Amendment hero. And I'm glad that he's not a First Amendment martyr, because I think that instead of putting him in a Marianas Islands courtroom, they wanted to throw him to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, was how things were headed there for him. So
initially there was an indictment, a sealed indictment that came under the Trump administration, I believe in 2018, and then that got processed up to a further 17 indictments, ranging from espionage, which is apparently the charge that he's pleading guilty to, and a range of other things that involve national security issues. But now with this agreement, he can literally actually just walk free. He'll be sent back to Australia, his home country, and it'll be time served of 62 months, which he's already served in the Belmarsh prison in Britain. So what life lies ahead for Mr. Assange?
Well, a life probably confined to Australia and other countries that will admit him, and not the United States probably, and not Europe. But I imagine that he will be telling his story publicly, now that he can do it himself. He was forced to do it mostly through intermediaries before. But it's a story that will be, I don't know, well received is the right word, but Americans will be interested to hear it, I think. He has a lot to say about how he was treated at the hands of Americans for journalism.
So let's delve into this, Scott. You said a couple of times now that he was essentially imprisoned and is being punished for journalism. And I think that's a distinction that really separates where people fall on this issue. So you have, on the one hand, you have people who say that he was engaged in journalism, doing something that news outlets do on a regular basis, which is essentially they've come across some information and they're putting it out.
If he worked for the New York Times, we'd all know his name, not because he was imprisoned, but because he was given, the Pulitzer Prize Award and other fantastic feats of, laud plaudits and congratulatory things. He'd have a chair in journalism somewhere, I think. Instead, because of his independent nature and WikiLeaks, he was imprisoned.
And so that comes to the other side, those who say that he should be in prison for espionage against the United States, exposing national secrets. And I believe one of the largest claims against him was that endangering military personnel and endangering Afghan citizens who had provided information to the US military by exposing their names. Now, I know that there was a 100-plus person investigation that went into this, and they couldn't find any direct evidence that anybody had been harmed by the leaks. But I think the principle behind it was that they could have been. And because he didn't follow a journalistic practice of, because, for example, let's say the New York Times, if they were to run with the information that Julian Assange put out.
Let me just stop you right there for a second, because what we learned is they lied about it. So what could have been true wasn't true, because what the establishment couldn't say is, we're really mad that he published our true facts that you are outraged about when you learn them. And many Americans were outraged by the facts they learned, the uncontested facts about how the U.S. was prosecuting its war in Iraq. And they were embarrassed about that fact. And so what they did was, instead of say, this is unacceptable, that our true nature has been revealed, let's throw up this smokescreen over here, which never happened. You just said yourself, they couldn't come up with an actual Afghan who had been negatively affected. You know who's negatively affected some Afghan lives? Well, I'll let the people decide, right? Whether it's Julian Assange or perhaps the United States government who's negatively affected Afghan lives. And what Julian Assange said was, by the way, when he was back before, he's been now in some kind of custody or asylum / custody for over 15 years. Before that, he said that nobody would win the Afghanistan war because all it was to bilk the American taxpayers of their money, which would go to Afghanistan and then basically come back to kind of, establishment supporting types. And I'll leave it to the fact checkers to decide if that's actually what happened or not. But I think that there's a credible case to suggest that is what happened.
And so how has the media in general treated Julian Assange over these, as you say, 15 years?
The establishment media has, by and large, vilified him and supported the establishment cause, and the independent media has, by and large, lionized him and held him up as a hero.
Why do you think that is?
Because the establishment media are, by and large, transcriptionists and spokesperson for the establishment. And, we're told that it's going to be an espionage charge, and you mentioned espionage earlier. And I think that when most people think of espionage, they think of someone discovering secrets to then apply to or to then benefit a rival or enemy of the espionage target, right? But that's not what happened here. It's not like Julian Assange discovered secrets that the United States had and then was going to publish them to the benefit of the North Koreans or the Chinese or something like that. He was going to publish true facts that the keepers of those secrets didn't wish to be revealed. We can all agree on that. But his motivation should matter.
And that, of course, brings us to the actual fact of what he's pleaded guilty to and how that is going to impact the First Amendment for journalists in both media, mainstream media and independent outlets going forward. We'll be back with Scott Cosenza after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Early in the show, we were talking about Julian Assange, WikiLeaks founder, and his new bid for freedom. But what I really want to delve into now, Scott, is how the process of his release, essentially for time served now, is going to impact the First Amendment going forward, because there's an issue here, isn't there, Scott? He's, as you've pointed out, in your opinion, he's been prosecuted for journalism. And up until this point, he's been essentially, I guess what many people would call a martyr for the First Amendment.
Yes.
But now that he's pleaded guilty, doesn't this set a rather, let's call it a troubling legal precedent in terms of he has been prosecuted and pleaded guilty, and that guilty charge has been accepted for doing what a number of mainstream fourth estate media outlets have been doing for a century or more.
So I think, firstly, I would say he was persecuted for journalism, not just prosecuted for it. And I think the reason why we can make that distinction is if somebody reveals secrets that are secret but not embarrassing, they don't get the same treatment that Mr. Assange seems to have gotten. And so it's that extra sting for him because of the embarrassment that he causes the officials, I think, that makes it spill over into persecution rather than simply prosecution. And with each successive, Julian Assange had said he was initially imprisoned based on a kind of somewhat wacky Swedish law whereby after consensual intercourse, women said that he didn't use prophylactics, and because of that, he could be actually held for rape. And at every stage in the game, Assange and his legal team said to the Swedish authorities, also the Ecuadorians said this when he was their asylum guest. Asylee, yes. A word I don't think I've ever used before. Yes, their asylee, that he would return to Sweden at any time to face the charges, provided that Sweden would guarantee that at the conclusion of either the trial and a not guilty verdict or a sentence served, that he wasn't delivered to the Americans, okay, like some Guantanamo detainee, basically, and wrapped up and put on a plane to the United States, because it was all a ruse, and Sweden would never agree to it because the United States had owned Sweden in that regard. The whole thing was just a ruse to get Julian Assange into the clutches of the United States authorities to, as Glenn Greenwald put it, put him in a dungeon for the rest of his life. And it's hard to disagree with that plan of theirs. They acted at every instance not to kind of like let justice prevail in this potential charge against him. And if you're a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, you can kind of see how if they can use a heinous, especially heinous crime, right? It wasn't that he was guilty of some paperwork crime, but rape. So, oh, well, then we don't have to regard him as a hero or a serious person because he's committed this, disgusting act. And it turns out he never did that. And it was all just used to get him into the clutches of U.S. Authorities. And it is a defeat for the First Amendment. Just like you say, I don't know that it has precedential value, but this is hardly a First Amendment win. It's just a win that Julian Assange doesn't have to spend the rest of his life in a hole in Belmarsh prison and gets to see his family and hug them, and breathe some sunshine. But it's no great victory for the First Amendment. This is still a defeat, a big, giant defeat that the establishment forces have delivered to independent media.
And how would this be different if it was just if the President of the United States just said, we're not pursuing charges anymore, directed the Department of Justice to not pursue charges anymore? Where's the difference here?
Well, Julian Assange can't travel to the United States. He's not going to be able to address free speech groups in the United States. As a felon who's committed the crime, who's agreed to have committed the crime of espionage against us, he certainly won't be granted immigration, a tourist visa. So this is a man who is, whose importance now to the world is that he's experienced this thing, and certainly he will be sought after and would be the guest of many groups in the United States if he were allowed to be. But that's a non-starter.
So there's a couple of ideas I want to run by, and these are not my ideas. I will.
Can I just interrupt and add one more thing?
Sure.
Just quickly. The word was that Donald Trump was going to do just what you said, call the Brits and say, okay, we're done with this guy, and that it was Pence and the security state who couldn't abide it. And they're the ones who pressed for his continued imprisonment and required it.
On that topic, just a brief aside, recently at the Libertarian nominating convention, Donald Trump turned up as a guest speaker and agreed to to commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht. And Scott, when he made that appearance, you were in the room, and Liberty Nation was one of the very first outlets to actually report that he had promised to commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the Silk Road
Mark, we were the
website,
first to confirm it from the Libertarian Party side, as I understand it.
Which was it's a good scoop for us, a very good scoop for Liberty Nation there, I think. Now, Ross Ulbricht, sure, he's well known within certain circles for being somebody who perhaps deserves the generous release based on what he's done.
He's a nonviolent criminal who was sentenced to multiple life terms.
Now, why wasn't there anything about Julian Assange there?
Well, I spoke to several of the campaigners, as you would say, or activists who were involved heavily in the Free Ross Ulbricht movement. And it was a commutation that Trump agreed to, by the way, just for people's information, because it could be a pardon or could be some other things. But it's a commutation, which means he just won't have to serve the custodial portion of his sentence, but he'd still be a felon. And the reason why is because he is a U.S. citizen sentenced by U.S. courts for a nonviolent crime to multiple life terms. And those are the reasons why. And that the impetus was to get it moving against Ulbricht. But I can tell you that most of the people I spoke to would happily have said yes, if given the power to release Julian Assange or argue against those charges. They're not anti-Assange's freedom. They just, are pro-Ross Ulbricht's freedom and thought they could get a win there. And of course they did. They extracted that promise from Donald Trump for coming to the convention and having the, platforming him, I guess, is the language of today.
Let's pop on your political analyst hat rather than your legal hat, if we may, for a second, Scott.
Okay.
Now, is there a political benefit to the Department of Justice and I guess the State Department?
No, I'm just laughing, Mark, because they did it. All you have to, the question answers itself. That's the only reason why they do anything. They obviously see a political benefit, or else they wouldn't have done it. This isn't a legal thing. This is them saying, yeah, there's definitely a political benefit.
Do you expect Julian Assange's face to be on posters at Joe Biden rallies saying, "Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Joe"?
Somebody in that organization convinced somebody with the power to do it that it was going to benefit them, and that's why they did it. And on that, I am 1,000% confident. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. Final
question for you, Scott. So, Scott, I want to read this quote to you, if I may. So, Seth Stern of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, he said that it was, I'm quoting here, alarming that the Biden administration felt the need to extract a guilty plea for the purported crime of obtaining and publishing government secrets. That's what investigative journalists do every day. What's your take on that?
I couldn't agree more. This is an act of aggression against journalism, and the takeaway lesson for journalists is don't screw with the establishment. We will do whatever we can and drive you to the ends of the earth to punish you for angering us. And I oppose it with every fiber of my being.
Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
First it was the Twitter files, then the Facebook files, but now the Amazon files, which appears to have flown under the Fourth Estate radar. Well, we're very fortunate to have with us somebody who did not let it fly away. Liberty Nation's chief political columnist, Mr. Graham J. Noble. Thanks for being here, Graham.
Pleasure to be here, Mark.
So, Graham, give us the rundown on what the Amazon files are and who's released them.
Well, the Amazon files are a result of investigations done by the House Judiciary Committee, which is now chaired by Representative Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio. The Judiciary Committee has a subcommittee now that was set up by Republicans, and it's called the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And the investigations that this subcommittee has been doing has produced what they or at least what Jordan is describing as the Amazon files. Now, he's actually just released on the X social media platform the essentially the third edition of the Amazon files now. And essentially what it shows is once again the Biden administration pressuring tech companies to censor certain opinions or even certain facts that they don't like or that they don't wish the public to see.
So you wrote an article about this on the pages of libertynation.com. From what I gather, it seems that Amazon were provided with, I think you called it a DNP, or do not promote list, that they say was provided by somebody within the Biden administration. And so these books on the do not promote list, it's not as though they were pulled from the shelves, although that may have happened in some case. I don't know about that. But there was no promotion of books based on the viewpoint. And this was largely about vaccines, right?
Yes, yeah. Essentially, the kind of do not promote class, which is what Amazon called it, was created by Amazon as a result of Biden administration officials essentially complaining to them about some of the books that they had were featured prominently on the Amazon website, and these books, yes, were all related to either vaccines or to the pharmaceutical industry. And so basically what happened was that the White House didn't actually provide Amazon with a list of books that it wanted not promoted, but it started complaining about a large number of books on this subject. And so then Amazon drew up a list of 43 books initially that they tagged with this kind of do not promote thing. Really, some of these books could be described as anti-vax, anti-vaccination books. They were books that claimed that vaccines either did not work or that damaged the body's immune system, or in one way or the other were just not good for you. That was the claim made by some of these books. However, some of the other books were not really, you couldn't really describe them as anti-vaccine books. They were just books that were kind of exploring the scientific research that's been done into vaccines, and perhaps exposing certain facts that for one reason or another the Biden administration doesn't want people to know about.
That's the thing with censors. They rarely use a scalpel. It's always a hammer. Now, there's a couple of issues that I want to dig into on this. And they're not necessarily related to the Amazon papers, more sort of a free speech position, because we hear so much about how bad free markets are. And of course, the people who are against free market ideas, they always call it capitalism, because that's what Uncle Karl Marx called it, right?
Yeah.
And they say that it's a failed system, and that it's created inequality. And without mentioning, of course, that free marketeering has dragged millions, hundreds of millions of people out of a point where they're on the verge of starvation, death, pecuniary problems or otherwise, and brought them to a point where what they have to worry about is, I probably can't afford my Netflix next month. That's my biggest problem. But again, back to this idea of putting the thumb on the scales of things, it's really destroying the free market of ideas, isn't it? Because if you have a government saying, or anything really, I mean, we see it with private companies all the time, but of course they're private companies. But when the government gets involved and puts its thumb on the scales of what is not getting promoted, that means that other things that are not as popular or as capable of working within the free market will get overweighted in terms of their influence. And so ideas that might be bad ideas get more weight and prominence against ideas that were at least in the free market of ideas are accepted by more people. So what's actually happening is not just the things that you can buy, it's the ideas that you can be presented with. And I think that's really the reason that I have such a problem with the idea of the federal government asking Amazon to shut down the promotion of books that they didn't agree with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Mark, because just following on from exactly what you say, you take that one step further. Now, you have an administration and also one party, the Democratic Party, claiming that they are the champions of democracy, that they're defending democracy, and that the people on the other side, the Republicans and the prospective GOP 2024 nominee Donald Trump, are the enemies of democracy. But here's the thing: one thing the founding fathers were very keen on was the idea that, okay, we are, for a start, constitutional republic. We're not a democracy. However, we do have a democratic mechanism of electing our leaders. Now, the founding fathers were always big on the fact that voters, it's good when voters are educated on the issues, because then they are casting responsible votes. Now, if you are censoring certain opinions and certain facts, and you are perhaps, therefore, as you said, you are therefore then just as a result of that, you are promoting perhaps dangerous opinions, or at least strange opinions, or and maybe falsehoods are getting promoted. You are essentially miseducating the voters, and by doing so, then you are causing people to vote in a way that perhaps is not in their best interest. So you are in fact damaging democracy itself by engaging in censorship and propaganda.
Put that on the back of a beer mat this time. Yeah. All right, Graham J. Noble, fascinating thought. Thanks for being here with us today.
You're welcome, Mark. Thanks.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Campaigns are won or lost at the ballot box, but they are made or broken on the campaign trail. Now, somebody who knows a lot about campaign trails is Liberty Nation's national columnist, host, and co-producer of the Conservative 5, Liberty Nation's online TV news show, Miss Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for coming in, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
It's great to have you here. Now, Sarah, you have spent considerable time, like Hunter S. Thompson, but presumably more sober, on the campaign trail.
Maybe sober, more sober. I don't know. I never met the guy, but he had some fabulous road trips. Yes, I from just statewide campaigns or countywide campaigns or the presidential campaign for John McCain in 2000. Yeah, I've been on the road and roaming. So it's an interesting world out there.
So this is why I wanted you on today, because I think what's happening with let's be fair, there's three major campaigns going on. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, RFK Jr. Now, of course, Cornel West and Jill Stein, they're running their campaigns. I don't think anybody thinks they even seriously think that they're going to, win the election. But RFK, he kind of thinks he might win the election. I mean, he's at least making that case. But what I want to talk about really is what your thinking is, with your experience of the campaigns, what do you think the highs and lows of each candidate's campaigns are at the moment? Let's start with the president himself, Mr. Joseph Robinette Biden. How's his campaign going? What's the energy like?
Well, there is no energy on his end, but there is energy with Harris and with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, and his surrogates. So there's energy there. And he's pulling in the big name celebrities and doing big events, but yet nobody, if you're looking at the people in between, let's say the Rockies and the Appalachians, they're like, we don't care. We don't care. He's not the most popular candidate. He's not the most popular guy. He's very slow and kind of methodical. He just doesn't spark what you need. Like, when Clinton came along, he was like this breath of fresh air, and Reagan was this, daddy figure that everybody, well, we need that. We need somebody to, bring us into the real world again. And with Biden, he doesn't do that. He's somewhat inaudible, and he's very stiff and motionless, and he seems to be lost all the time. When you have to have the former president, Barack Obama, lead you off of the stage as your own fundraiser, those things add up.
But for anybody who
So,
hasn't seen that particular clip, they had this this big fundraiser with all the big Hollywood names,
mhm.
and towards the end, he's about to leave the stage, and he freezes up, and then after it becomes apparent that he's frozen up, Barack Obama taps him and then puts an hand around his shoulder and leads him away. Now, the left-leaning media tried to say that this was a deep fake that didn't happen, and then they would put out the actual video to show that it didn't happen. But what it showed was exactly what everybody was claiming had happened, that he froze up, he didn't move, and then Barack Obama had to tap him on the shoulder and walk him away.
Yeah.
How do they hope to get away with that?
The thing is, you really can't anymore because people see it in real time. If you're watching YouTube and you see the president giving a speech, it's real time. It's not a doctored event. If it's on C-SPAN, it's real time. It's not doctored. And he just keeps fumbling and bumbling. Juneteenth celebration. Every person in that audience was rocking out to some really good music and in celebration of Juneteenth, and he stood stock still like he was a mannequin. It was almost creepy. So,
It was a little disturbing.
People see that.
So the assessment of the Biden campaign, it's very much a rose basement strategy. I think we can call it the rose basement strategy. Now, going the opposite direction here, you've got Donald Trump, who, and I wrote about this on the page of libertynation.com, and I made the case that if Trump has, not Trump specifically, but if all presidents had a specific superpower, Bill Clinton, maybe his likability, for example, everybody seemed to like Bill Clinton, right? Donald Trump's would be his campaign energy, and the guy's everywhere, and he brings big crowds. And I thought, what happens if, when he is sentenced for the 34 felonies, what if they take him? I mean, I don't think he'll go to prison. We don't know that yet. But what if he's confined to somewhere, like a home arrest somewhere in either Florida or New York? What if his ability to travel and do those campaigns is curtailed? How does that work out for him?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, how long the sentence would be. If they take him out of the convention, I can tell you this: wherever he's at, convention will probably come to him. One way or the other, he's gonna have a crowd, and he has energy and focus. And one of the things I thought was kind of a good summation was radio host Charlemagne the God. He came out and said, "You always know where you stand. You don't go, what did he just say? Where are we going with that? You know where you stand, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. There are no questions when Trump leaves the room. No questions. He just spilled it out there, and people lap it up. So I think that's a different style of strategy. Is he's very energetic and not as, I mean, he's not as focused as Joe Biden. He's kind of all over the place, but he gets his point across and he energizes the crowd.
What are the low points for the Trump campaign, would you say?
34 felony convictions.
Well, okay. Let's go besides 34 felony convictions, because I'm sure by the end of the year he might have that up to 90, 91.
Could be 300 by then. I don't know. Low points is, he's got a base out there and they're not going anywhere. So I don't know what's going to happen between now and maybe there's going to be a big October surprise or something. But now I think he's on solid footing. You're looking at a guy who's had all of this thrown at him and he's still neck and neck with Joe Biden in the swing states. I mean, nobody's moving. It's and if they're moving, they're not moving towards the Democrats. They're moving towards RFK Jr.
Now that's what I want to talk about next. So RFK Jr. He's playing what I would consider quite a smart campaign. He's announcing where he's qualified for ballot access. He's even pointing out places where he's got the signatures, and although that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be on the ballot, he's putting forward the case that he is going to be everywhere around the country. And I think it's a smart move, right? Because if you're just on one or two ballots, nobody sees you as a serious contender. And to me, and I'm not an expert on campaigns by any means, but it seems to me that what he's trying to do is give people the idea, at least, that, look, here's a serious contender that if you get behind him could upset the Republican-Democrat apple cart. Now, I don't think that upset's going to come, but I think it's quite interesting that this kind of campaign could really even threaten that to happen. What's your take?
Well, if you look at RFK Jr., he is very focused. He's quiet. He's like the sniper you don't see. He takes a problem and he fixes that, and he moves on to the next one, and he fixes that, and he just continues to go through. And he's got a lot of really hardcore fans out there that really think it's his time. So I'm not sure that it is his time, but he's a serious threat to Trump and to Biden, I believe. And his style is quiet and steady. And right now you've got everybody ringing all these clanging bells on the two, elite parties. And then you got this other guy just kind of slowly moving through it. So as styles go, I think he is, I think he's formidable. And I think he's a steady, calm, qualified person to be president if it came down to that.
I can't remember where I read it, but I read a lot on the internet and in actual books. Don't put me down as just an internet reader. I do read books.
If it's on the internet, you got to.
If it's on the internet, clearly. But yeah, I read somewhere that the kind of campaign he's running could prove to be a model for future independent candidates, and I think that seems like quite a serious assertion.
He uses social media and the internet better than Trump or Joe Biden, I believe. He does a lot of podcasts. He does a lot of, it seems like one-on-one time with the audience, and it's really not one-on-one time, but you feel like it is. So he really is harnessing that media. So I'm sorry I interrupted you and rode with that.
No, that's quite right. No, you're absolutely right.
Put that horse back in the barn, Mark. Go ahead.
It's too late. Horse gone. The podcast nation, as it were, the Joe Rogan shows, things like this, the Jordan Peterson over on Daily Wire now, these kind of long form talks that cover a range of topics. I think every presidential candidate in future will have to run that particular gauntlet, and I think America will be much better off for that kind of exposure of their politicians. Sarah Cowgill, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that's all we have time for on this special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests, Scott Cosenza, Graham Noble, and Sarah Cowgill. And of course, thank you at home for taking the time to tune in, week out, wherever you are. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.